Welcome to the Revelation Ministries podcast. I'm Clifford Bullard. Today I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to share my testimony with y'all. It's not something I do generally. Um, so I am a little nervous about doing this. But I'm 46 years old. I've been saved for 20 something years now. Um, when I was a teenager, I suffered with depression and acceptance, and it only got worse with the fact that my stepdad at the time was verbally abusive to me as well as my mom, and I turned to alcohol first and smoking weed. Then I got older, moved out, and started thinking I was living, doing drugs, cocaine, methamphetamines, and it sent me down a bad road. I spiraled real bad, and I had a little apartment at the time, and I woke up and a little voice in my head told me just to go. And I remember I went out to my car, got in, and it was sitting on an empty tank of gas, and something just told me to go. So I went from Gadsden, Alabama to Cedartown, Georgia, which was around 90 something miles on an empty tank of gas to my brother's house. Then one Wednesday, I was watching church channels called Sky Angel. It was the only thing that come through at the time. And I kept watching all the ministries, the church services. And every time I went to they did the altar call, I would pray, for God to forgive me. But it didn't feel like I actually got it. Then about 4 o'clock that afternoon, a little voice talked to me again. He told me to go to church that night. And I was like, why do I want to go to church? I've been watching church all day. But it kept on, kept on. Finally, I gave in and said, all right, I'll go to church. And I borrowed my brother's car and went to a little church called Cedar Bluff First Baptist. And the preacher was preaching about Jonah getting a second chance to go talk to the people in Nineveh. And they have a big screen up on the wall there. It has Bible verses, chorus songs, choir songs. And the little thing popped up on there that said, salvation is in Jesus Christ. I sat there and I stared at that. Missed the last 10 minutes, 15 minutes of the preacher's sermon. And at the end of the service, this older gentleman walked up to me and he said, son, would you like to pray about something? I said, yes, sir, I would. And I went and I got an altar. And to me at the time, it felt like he had just laid all his weight on me. But then I realized what it was. It was the weight of my sins, the weight of all the things I've done in my life. And I just simply prayed, Lord, I want my second chance. I want the second chance you gave Jonah. And as soon as I said it, all that weight was gone. And I got up and I called the pastor later that evening and we set up a date to get baptized. A few years later, I started a youth thing at the church I was going to. Supposed to be a Bible study for the young kids and teenagers, but it ended up turning into for adults and the whole church. And after doing that for about probably a year and a half maybe, I felt I was working and I kept hearing this little voice again said, "Feed my sheep." And I'm not a person, I get nervous talking to people. Uh, I don't like being in front of people. And I was like, "Are you sure?" And he kept telling me, "Feed my sheep, feed my sheep." And I announced my call to preach. And I'll never forget the pastor of the church, good man of God. He said, "I want you to do something for me. I want you to try to run from it for 3 months. Try to run." And I did what he said. I tried to do it, and I realized more, and the days went by, I couldn't do it. And probably about 2 weeks in, I went up to him, told him I couldn't do it no more. Couldn't run. And he said, "I know." And I asked him why he decided to do that. Told me that. He said, "If you can run, then you know you're really not called to do to preach, because God's not going to let you run away from it." And I started preaching, evangelized a little bit, uh, got my license to preach, and a few years down the road, we started church we're at now, which is Pentecostal Power Ministries. And I started listening to What the World Needs Jesus, which I've talked about on the podcast. And I've even had Ricky Phillips on the podcast on an episode. And something told me I've always been interested in doing stuff like this. And I started the Revelation Ministries podcast. And at first, in my head, I didn't see the listeners, because I didn't really care about whether people followed it or anything like that. It's more of I wanted to get the word of Jesus out, and I didn't want to. If I got subscribers, whatever, that was all right. But my main concern was helping people get closer to Jesus, and it's steadily, slowly growed. And I had got the idea while I was at work the other day to do the YouTube and the TikTok channel for the podcast. And we recently started those. But long story short, if you need Jesus, he's just, all you gotta do is ask him. It's not a very difficult process. You don't have to jump through this hoop, jump through that hoop. You just gotta ask him for forgiveness and forgiveness. And the Bible tells us, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And in John, 3:16 is one of the most famous verses, but 3:17 is just as important. It says that God sent his Son to the world not to condemn the world, but through him the world might be saved. And I invite everybody to read the 3rd chapter of Jonah, to read how God gave Jonah his second chance. and just read the testimonies of the people in the Gospels. You know, the blind man, all the people he's healed, the woman with the issue of blood, he forgave every one of them through their faith in him. And I believe that's what we all need. This world definitely needs Jesus. It definitely needs his forgiveness, because this world is not a is an evil place, and we need Jesus now more than we ever have. So I invite y'all to pray, ask God for forgiveness, and hopefully get to talk to y'all more here on YouTube, TikTok, as well as on Spotify and Amazon Music with the podcast. And check out What the World Needs Jesus with my good friend, Pastor Ricky Phillips. And thank you, and God bless.